Thanks for coming along. This is a Breaking Into Media event as part of the Royal Television Society. And we're joined by Joel Collins, who's a production designer on his Dark Materials and also an executive producer for the show for HBO. And what we're going to talk about is how Joel started originally, what he does day to day at Bad Wolf or Wolf Studios in Wales on Dark Materials, which is about 3/4 of the way through the third season of shooting. Joel, is that about right?
Yeah, something like that.
So I want to talk about what you're doing today and typically how that works on a big show. But I want to start at the start, if you don't mind. And can you remember, did you study at university, firstly? And what did you study?
I did. I've always been an avid kind of creative since I was very, very young, drawing and stuff. So I always thought I would either be a farmer or some kind of artist, and went to study fine art. Oddly, in 1986, I think it was. I was offered a job on Who Framed Roger Rabbit before I went to study fine art, and I just thought they were a bit crazy and didn't know what they were talking about. So I just said, of course I don't want to work on your film. And someone had showed them all my little sketches and stuff and characters that I was drawing, and basically, I got offered to work on that. But I just thought, no, I'm an artist. So I went off and explored that and did a degree. Ended up doing installation. So it was a bit like set creation, right. Environmental installation. And so it kind of, and the previous conversation about a film before I ever did any of that was the thing that made me think there was something in a career outside of art, within art, but outside of fine art.
Did you have friends or members of your family or something that opened the door? Because often I think with film and TV, people think it's a kind of bit of a closed shop. And now we have, there's 120 film degrees in the UK, stacks of TV degrees, specialist production design degrees, and all those kind of things. But that's relatively recent, really, in the last 20 years or so.
It's not hard. I think it's not hard to know somebody in the industry, is it? Now. And I met, so yes, there were connections all over the place, really. And I grew up in London, and friends, people lived nearby, were actors, babysitters. She was Miss Piggy. You know what I mean? Like it was, and my dad had been at the Royal College of Art. My mum had been in art college, and they were in kind of different types of graphics and advertising things. And so yeah, there was a degree of connectivity, not directly anyone in film, but other than like on an abstract level,
right?
But enough connectivity for me to kind of like start to like feel around and grab at straws and get names and numbers and all that kind of stuff.
Was it something you'd always aspired to do, even when you were doing your degree? This even saying now that the installation work was a little bit like...
I hadn't even, no, I honestly, what's really interesting is that film, when I started designing 26 years ago, so I've been around the industry for 30 years. But when I remember somebody came to me who'd done a film course, who was like working for nothing or, for like trying to get into the business. And I was like, employed them or got them on, low rate first, just, seeing what they were like, which you don't do anymore because that's completely inappropriate. But basically, they'd done this degree at Wimbledon and they were really knowledgeable about film. And I was completely like impressed. I was like, wow, because everything for me was instinct. It was experiential. And it wasn't a problem. And you realize some people go to MAs having done architecture or design or art or been in the world. So you don't like, but what was interesting, those people who'd done the film courses just came with this really inner core wealth knowledge, and they were able to focus their talents a bit quicker.
Right.
Than the people who are slightly in the dark feeling or for objects trying to find their way through.
I think with production design, it draws from all disciplines, doesn't it? And it tends to be the person who runs it here at Falmouth Uni he's a as a designer who came through advertising, music video, where it's, you know, it's obviously shared interest there, but looks at it as an ideation and design principle kind of thing. The artistry element here often comes from experimental students, or like you say, kind of people coming from more the fine art discipline and those kind of things. What do you think are the qualities that make a great production designer?
Well, I think there's a complexity in production design, and I always say to people, remember, this is production design. You're not an art director. You're not working under the team. You're not like filtering down into that core. You are responsible for the production, and you ultimately have to take a kind of overview and responsibility that stops you, in my opinion, takes you out of a silo and makes you stand up and take a kind of an accountability across all the areas of the production. So you know, that involvement across all the creative fields, plus the scheduling and the financial fields. And I think lots of people think, well, you know, you get your opportunity and you can sit away and sketch and draw and visualize stuff and wear a cravat and tell everyone how it's going to be. And without doubt, in each area of the film industry, in the tech areas, when you're at the top of a tree, or in the kind of even the above the line, which people probably know what that means, but like, you know, those areas that are slightly more, you know, actor, finance, producerial, kind of director, it doesn't really matter, because if you want power, there's a lot of power in those points, because you have a lot of control. You can make or break a show or a film. You can do amazing things or irreparable damage. You can go heavily over budget and bring it down, or you can bring it in budget and make everything work efficiently and well. So there's an extraordinary responsibility, and it's easy to clamber to the top. And as some people do, they fall to the top. But it's not necessarily something that, if you don't like politics, for instance, you know, you'll just get angry quite quick and frustrated. If you don't like fast thinking, creative thinking, that this American producer said to me a long time ago, when I was a bit upset about something on a film, he looked at me and he said, "Grieve quick, Joel, just grieve quick." And I was like, okay, like that. And it basically was like, get over yourself, shut up, get on with it, get over yourself. And literally probably stuck with me, because I thought, well, if my idea doesn't wash, I have to have another one and another one and another one and another one. Like, they're like trains in a station just coming in. And that is a power in itself. So not only do you, as a designer, do you have to have a kind of eyes everywhere, a responsibility, a duty of care to people. You take responsibility for the safety. I have an extraordinary insurance policy, because on every document with the health and safety executive, I could be sued. My name, if anyone has an accident, is there to be pulled out and taken to court. It is a vast. You're kind of like a ringmaster of a circus, which is really more complex than anyone realizes. And on a show where you're dealing with millions, multi-millions, 50 millions, 100 millions, it just gets more complex. But the interesting thing is, no one ever knows. No one thinks, actually, your name has gone out to the government, to a governmental body, as a responsible figure for things that make you liable, for example. So that it's not just a fun and games. It's an extraordinarily serious situation you put yourself in.
Such a poignant time to talk about that, in terms of the accident on the set of Rust a few weeks ago, and the implications of that for all of the people involved. And a death on a set is absolutely the epitome of when things go very, very wrong, isn't it? And I think that safety aspect, maybe we'll talk a bit about that with Dark Materials shooting through COVID and that experience in a moment. Can you remember who gave you your first break?
There's a guy called John Stevenson at Henson's Creature Shop. I went in there, looked around, and I said, "Hey, can I have a job?" And they went, "Where's your work?" And I went, "I'll come back with my work." And I just wandered out the building kind of looking at all the pictures on the walls. And I went home, spent a month and a half, a while, sculpting, drawing, and creating creatures, and put them in a folio, photograph them against a little kind of bit of paper, like that, sketch, sculpt, paint. I was like painting plastiline,
yeah,
quite well, because I'd been an art student doing everything. I could sculpt and draw and paint, and my technical skills were pretty good. I didn't know I even had some of the ones that I needed. So I kind of faked a creature portfolio and got a job on Babe, was the first, the pig. And it didn't take long for me to become a creature designer. The first thing they said is, here's a broom. And I worked on this show called Dinosaurs while I was doing Babe, which was like a puppet thing from the early 90s, late 80s. And so he said, I know you've done a degree. I know you can clearly sculpt, draw, paint, and you've got talent. Here's a broom. If you don't sweep for at least a day, you will have no idea about what this business means, type thing, There's the van keys, for a big company like Henson's. And I was like, I got thrown in with the buyers and having to go to places in a van to get loads of stuff. I was like having to clean up. And they were like, it was not I saw it as punishment, like proving a point. And to be honest, it was, but it was actually quite useful.
Do you think there's a bit of ego checking when people start? I think when, like you said about these people that you'd met who'd done a film degree, specialist film degree, that you come out of it. A colleague of mine used to say, when you finish your degree, he used to flash a picture of a fledgling bird on a cliff and say, this is how the world sees you. So then it's about reproving yourself out in the world a little bit. And that those kind of the sweeping or running positions or whatever it is, the making tea cliche and all that kind of stuff is important to kind of understand what a place is and who's doing what, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you might be a big fish in a small pond at your college. You might be the star of the course, but the amount of CVs I've had where people have emailed me saying, I'm a production designer, have you got any work? And I'm like, what? And the thing I always say to students is that if you're in design, I transcend design in lots of ways, so that's a bigger thing for me now, I'd like to think. But if you're a designer or a fledgling creative, a director, designer, you've done whatever you've done. You don't say you're that when you graduate. You say, I know nothing other than I did pretty well at college, and I want to learn everything, and I will do anything, well, within reason, anything. Everyone's now aware of working for nothing because you shouldn't. Like there's actually systems in place about how you get into the industry, which there used not to be. And it was and I've had lots of students ask me, like, how do I stop myself being abused in the sense of my time or whatever? It's really interesting. Everyone comes out with this anxiety that they're going to go into the film industry and work 17-hour days and, get whipped or something. And I'm like, well, it doesn't quite work that way. The people who work really hard are often the people who are going to get something back out of it. They've spotted a gap and they just literally expand into that gap. They push themselves with no experience into a gap by shining so bright. And you're not asked to do that. That's a choice. You don't have to do silly hours or anything like that. The choice that I'd like to think anyway, in most modern shows that are being made now, there are rules and regulations, but some people do them, and they do them because they just see something, they see an opportunity to do something a bit better than anyone else is doing. And there's no law to say you should, or rule to say you should do that or shouldn't. It's really hard. Everyone's different. Some people just work till they drop because they love something so much. So, but I do say, don't put on your CV, I'm a director or a designer or whatever. It's not ideal because everybody wants to know you've got those skills, but they don't necessarily want you walking around telling everyone that you do that.
We've had in a few masterclasses where people say that this idea of filling the space. If someone's interested in edit or sound or design, that those people, you gravitate around those people in a production over time, and then you start to fill that purpose, and people realize how you're making a bigger contribution than perhaps you came in with. And I think it's a really important principle, isn't it, to be open and kind of engage with that period. I know that there's lots of work. Our students have worked with BEC2, the union, Royal Television Society, other bodies are kind of working around these terms and conditions and minimum wages and those kind of things. So I know Bad Wolf have a brilliant relationship with Screen Alliance, this kind of development scheme with the studio, which is terrific. And it's about kind of looking after creative talent, isn't it? And trying not to
100%. Yeah. I mean, we have a whole system in place here. I've had thousands of young people come through my office, and obviously they're all, the idea is to get the Welsh schools into the situation where they can understand. And now there's a GCSE in film and TV, which is amazing. So at school, if you walk in here, this studio, and you go on a huge set and you see these crazy things, and you could, they pre-COVID, they were coming into my office, and I'd have all these little young 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, whatever, just coming in and saying, how much do you earn? How much is the computer worth? And I'm like, I wasn't expecting those questions. I thought, but basically they were inspired, I suppose, to a point where you've just planted a seed. And when they graduate, they could say, because the film industry is not what everyone realizes, you don't think too much. And even at film school, you don't really think about the reality of it. You could create a company that does portaloos and do very well. You could be in rigging, carpentry, construction, electrician, plumbing. It doesn't matter. There's a job. It's a microcosm. It's like it's its own ecosystem. There's almost every job from legal to finance to. So the film industry takes anyone and everyone from every walk of life, because there is a point where it's its own ecosystem that you could plug into. And I don't think people realize or really understand, because there's only so many things Kingsley, your college, for instance, can teach people. You don't teach people to become electricians. You might teach them how to light a set. But the point is, maybe you do teach people how to be that. I don't think, but I don't know. But my point is this: there's just real skills in the real world that translate into film, because there's a weight of work that are kind of quite translatable. And when you can tell young people that they don't have to be a director, a designer, they don't have to be top of a tree to get a job in this industry and get paid well, they could have a whole host of other real world kind of skills that they could aim a dart at the film industry for. And that's an interesting one, because people don't do that. They're always like, wouldn't it be great if you become a film director? We've got to change the narrative to expand the industry in the right way. And the narrative is not that everyone wants to be at the top of the tree, because not everybody needs to be. There are a lot of people who don't. I've got somebody who works for me for 21 years. Every day she's asked, because she did Black Mirror with me and movies and everything, and she's literally my right-hand person, and she's co-designed with me. And people say, can you design this film? She literally got offered yesterday. She's been offered every week. She's offered to design something. If she wanted to design, she would have done it. If she wanted to just go over there and design, she would have done it. We have a very great relationship working together. She's more of a producer than a designer in one sense. She's extraordinarily creative, but she's a supervising art director and one of the best in England. And why go and she's not everybody sees a job as the top of their tree, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right.
So the top of her tree is a different direction ultimately, I think. So the thing that's interesting is yes, we all are learning here the key crafts and skills that are quite, that maybe if you're lucky you get into those kind of key positions. But if you really want to go out to the community to tell everyone about film, there is, you name a job and you could probably do it in the film industry type thing.
Yeah, I get you. If people have questions, if you pop them in the Q&A box, we'll kind of work through them as we go along. I wanted to ask about, we'll talk about His Dark Materials, because you're there right now. When you were taken on or started working on that show, what were the first principles? How do you design the look of something? How do you build a world? Can you talk through, just from first principles, when you arrived at Bad Wolf, they're making this, they're adapting the book. There's been a film before by that wasn't great. Let's be honest.
Well, that
So
wasn't,
you're
yeah.
making this
I mean, that,
a massive show, one of the biggest in Britain. What's the first principle for you, and how does that trickle through your team? What are people doing for you?
so I have a kind of really simple principle of exploration of script. So I see this kind of relationship that we have in film from a kind of creative or the designer, and as just part of the production process and part of the writing process. So yes, there's a you know, so if you look at the writing process, I have one kind of like thing that I focus on, and then if you look at the production process, I'm like, excuse me, I'd like to be in from the beginning, and I'd like to make sure that that beginning sees the shoot through, and then after the shoot, I'd like to go through the edit, through to deliverable of post. So I that's not normal. A lot of people don't do that. They do the shoot, they get, can you do 8 weeks prep and do a shoot and we'll say goodbye, and then you don't see anything for 6 months or whatever. So contractually, I slightly do things differently. Dark Materials, I saw an opportunity while I was like just finishing my 19th Black Mirror, and had spent all this time nurturing and employing designers. I'd employed, you know, some amazing people like Carol Spear, who is Cronenberg's designer. You know, I'd nurtured and taken for dinner and, like, you know, guaranteed awards to people. I'm like, you come work for me and you're going to get. So these were some seasoned designers and people that I was trying to entice into the Black Mirror franchise, which really weirdly, and people wouldn't think it because they think the show's successful, but for the first 5-6 years of my time, I did that show for 7.5 years. For the first 4-5 years of my time on that show, a lot of people didn't care. A lot of people didn't know. A lot of people were like, why are you still doing it? And I was like, people will get it. You know, everyone will get it in the end. And they're like, why? Nobody really watches it. I'm like, no, they'll get it. It's just so that, and it is extraordinary faith in what you're doing. But basically, as I moved into this, I saw a kind of ungreenlit show with Jane Tranter, who's the kind of powerhouse in television, who's like, I'm going to make this show, and we're going to build a studio, and we're going to make everyone's lives good. And I'm like, oh, okay, sounds good. I'm in. You know, like, that sounds exciting. And so for me, just putting visuals around the words, exploring on a massive level, as I do with a team, which is huge amounts of referencing, and then concepts, mind-blowing amounts of concepts, where it's almost like storyboard concept, visual, kind of high-end visuals across everything in the show. I use this as kind of like, as it were, visual conditioning. Because the script you read, you look at the script, you read the words, you go, okay, I think I get the story. And if you, what I've worked out over my years, and I did this all the way through Black Mirror, I would have a director coming in, and I had this big office and an assistant and team of graphics people, and I'd be like, okay, we have an hour, get everything off my wall and put everything back up on my wall for the next director who's coming in, because I want him to do this Black Mirror, and he's shaky. He doesn't know how we're going to do this. I don't get it. You know, it's not my bag. And so my wall would then get washed over with all the artwork and the kind of inspirational locations in Canada or Iceland or South Africa or whatever. And it would be this kind of like, so as they come in and say, hey, let's talk, they're looking around the room going like, and I'm like, yeah, this is the show you'll be making. And as we talk, they look. And most often it kind of seeped into the point where they were, by the end of it, relatively excited. Not only is the script pretty good, but they couldn't visualize really what it meant to make that weird script. I think, as you said, you know, there wasn't much description in those Black Mirror scripts.
I guess the distinction is between Dark Materials and Black Mirror is Black Mirror as an anthology show. Every episode, you're building a world, which is astonishing if you're doing that 6-8 times a year, you know, or each season. And it's understanding that TV directors tend to come in and do 1, maybe 2 eps. It's changing a little bit, but they arrive in a world. And we met on Callister, and I remember arriving on set, and someone said all this stuff was built. The gaffers had been in, they'd lit it. It was all there prior to the director coming on board. I think pretty much, or certainly.
I mean, that was pretty much Black Mirror. We'd already Charlie and I had worked out what everything was going to be before I employed a designer and a director, and like we employed the director, the costume, the makeup, the designer. So I designed some, but really I'd already done it, like some not in a meaningful way, like not done the hard graft, but him and I had worked out the story and the visual link. So we kind of knew the tone of what it was and how we were going to do it, because that's how we were going to get ahead in the anthology. So yeah, when Toby started, we'd already got the shit was up and running.
Yeah.
And everyone's looking for a little edge, a little crack where they can go, but this is my mark. Because you know what, everyone wants to make a mark. And at that point on Black Mirror, I wasn't even, the mark wasn't a consideration to me. It was literally survival. It was like creative survival.
Yeah. I mean, so, it's brutal, isn't it? But with Dark Materials, you're building an entire world over multiple seasons, aren't you?
So you have so I worked out with the Phillips books, and I had a proposal to Jane and the team here in Philip, which was number one, I felt that Philip wrote the books in the 90s, and that there was a nostalgic nature, if you read the books, to what's happening, in those books. There's, it was a bit Victoriana and coal fires at points, and so I was like, okay, number one, I think to engage an audience, you can keep a sense of nostalgia, but can we also modernize the nostalgia? So my pitch was to be a bit more brutalist, a bit more mid-century, a bit more style to the younger audience and the audience like us, who, if in the 90s, probably saw Victorian things as nostalgic, but now we probably don't. We see 70s as nostalgic, or 60s. Wow. Does that make sense? Yeah. It was a kind of reconnecting, a rewiring of like what the audience are going to see as what the audience are going to sense a connection to. And I think over the 30 years since the book was written or whatever, the new young adults are now, the new group of youngsters are now adults, and their sense of nostalgia has moved up that notch. So I rebooted its nostalgic properties with the kind of with the backing of Philip, and it wasn't really detrimental or meaningful. I don't think the audience see that when they watch the show, but if you look, you'll understand what I mean, like Coulter's Apartment or Magisterium or whatever. But it was an interesting process, and we had 3-4 months to. I kind of had 3-4 months to really work out with the story what this show was, because we worked out that the commissioners and everyone who wanted to make the show or might want to make the show, it's an unmakeable show. No one, they'd seen the movie and it didn't really do very well.
Right.
So how we make the TV show? So I basically created this, what we call a war room of imagery, which kind of walks you visually through the show. Some of it stayed strong from that point on till we finished season 1. And I'd already almost worked out in that point what Cittàgazze was for season 2. So by 2017, I'd kind of already designed Cittàgazze. That doesn't change the fact that this is my 5th year on that journey. And once you've got that basic stuff in the bag, the journey is insanely long. It's crucifyingly, torturously, to survive through all of the complexity of that, to get through to the end and the edit and the VFX deliverables. So really, it was like, that was the fun point. And I went with Jane Tranter to LA for a week, and we pitched to all of the broadcasters and discussed everything we were planning, and we did our kind of due diligence across all the show, and the show got greenlit, and we started into production in 2018. So that was kind of its journey. The thing that I would say to people, I mean, it's a trick, but it's not a trick, is outside of having lots of ideas, if you think your idea is the best, or you've ripped off the wall all the crap ones, or the ones that people like respond negatively to, sitting around them is a really good thing to do. Not just like pulling them out of a box, like, do you want to have a look at this? Kind of throwing them away on the wall around you.
Right.
Just letting them hover in the air while you're talking about how we're going to do this and what are we going to do, is to me a system of kind of visual conditioning. Because what happens is, if you've done the right work, everyone doesn't say anything. They just look around and go. When it's the wrong work, people go, that's weird, isn't it? what's that? And you're like, oh, I put that up on the wall because I was thinking, and they're like, God, I didn't see it like that. And you're like, okay, no, they leave the room, pull it off, have a look at it. There's clearly something that's kind of just to discuss in that image. But what's really interesting is if nobody says anything and they keep coming back and talking to you in a room full of imagery, by the time they get to set, they're like, that's exactly how I saw it.
Yeah, because it's kind of osmosis, right? It's
precisely. There's nothing clever in like, I'm going to surprise you with an image. You know, be inclusive all the way through. That journey, the journey is as important as the result. You know, the failures, the concrete foundation of failure is where you build your success. And the failure is much denser and thicker than the successes. You just don't have to show everyone. But if you go on a journey with people where they know that you've tried that, they know you've worked really hard, they know you've explored, and then pop, and they've been on that journey, that pop is like, yeah. Whereas if you just kind of do it all cerebrally on your own, blah, 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 and then you're just like, how about this? You know, it's like draft one of a script isn't often what you make. But you're on the journey discussing the script for quite a while. You know,
I think it's a great thing for people to understand that process is ongoing. That like you say, the stuff on the wall is maybe not the show because you're going to allow people in. There's a criticality to it. You listen with that first splurge of ideas, and then it's about the selectiveness, isn't it, to get to that end goal. And that you've got to. It's almost like wearing the failure a little bit, isn't it, to allow someone to double check with you because you might be wrong. You might think I'm not sure about that one. And if everyone gravitates to that image, it's kind of, there's something there, isn't there?
You know, you're almost as wise to put everything on the wall, but say I've deliberately put a couple of things I really don't like on this wall. Right. And they're like, what? And you're like, well, I've just done it because I'm interested we can have a conversation. I love everything except for two things, but I'm not going to tell you what they are because I'm interested in seeing what you think. And then people are like, you know, and challenge yourself, even if you love everything and there isn't anything you don't like on the wall, but challenge people and yourself to always challenge, you know, to like challenge the creative process a bit. There's no such thing as like an idea is the idea and it's best. I mean, that's just kind of a bit silly and actually isn't helpful because who was it who said they shot, they were very exacting and they would do a lot of takes, but they would then use the second take, type thing. That it's the same across directing and all these fields in our industry. You might do 50 takes of something, knowing that the second one was the best, but you're just trying to improve it. But no one gets to take two and stops, unless you really the schedules, unless you actually don't have any time to carry on. But basically, as a rule, no one does one take and goes, that's brilliant. I mean, I have known people to do that and literally they've storyboarded the shot themselves. They wrote the script. They knew the shot and they had other people going, was that okay? Yeah, that worked. Move on. So it's rare, you know, most of the time it's like, I just want to, and even if they love the first take and they get to 30 or 10 or whatever, and they use the first, you know, they're kind of, it's like checks and balances in this business to ensure quality.
There's a great story. It was on The Departed, and Jack Nicholson, they run the scene and Jack Nicholson says to Scorsese, I want to try something. Will you let me try something? It's not in the script. And Scorsese is understanding enough to allow that to happen because it's Jack Nicholson, right? And it's in this scene and he's been thinking about it. So he said, the cost to me is nothing. It's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you know, it's the same setup, but he's going to do something different. And that's what appeared in the movie. And understanding that can happen, you know, that the way you envision it might not be when you bring an actor on set, that they may do something a little bit different, and allowing the space and time for that to happen to some extent it can be important.
Well, it's not just that, but your creativity. So just picture the complexity of this. So my understanding has shifted from being a producer as well, because as a designer, you make a set and you're like, so can everyone get in the set now, please? You know, type thing. Because we built it, you know, it cost £1 million or whatever. It cost £50. It doesn't matter. You built the space and it's amazing. You know, you're pleased. Get in there, shoot it. Put the lights up. No, not too high. In that corner. Okay, that looks nice. The lighting looks good. That's brilliant. The set is amazing. It's brilliant. I'm really happy. Okay, brilliant. Where's the actors and the director? They're coming in. This is exciting. Now they come in, they turn the light out. You're like, hang on, but that's lighting up the key prop that they made, and they put the light out, and then they pop a light on a bit of wall that wasn't your finest moment, and you're like, hang on, why have they done that? Because obviously you're lighting the set, they're lighting the actor. Yeah. So you're like, okay, this is a compromise.
Yeah.
The actor walks in and goes, do you know, I think we should do the whole scene by the window. And you're like, but what about the 40-foot room, you know, that's made for the scene, you know? And they stand by the window. I think I just want to stand and, you know, like that. So suddenly you're like, well, I wonder if they do a reverse. But hey, time's short, you know? So they're up against the wall. And you're hoping they get the reverse from the window looking back in the room. But you know what? You know, as a designer, you're like you're shuffling around saying, "Are you going to get the reverse? You're going to get the reverse. You're going to do the reverse here, aren't you?" And people are like, well, "I think if we can, but we've got to get to another set. We've got to move on." You know, like we're going if we get the scene in this kind of really beautiful, static, simple way, close up, like you know, whatever, we're done. And you're like, okay, but you know, so okay, so you kind of like start to get conflicted because the director's like dealing with the actor and the actor wants to shoot it a certain way and have it intimate and not see the big set and blah, blah, blah. Now, as a designer, you're kind of like, see my set. As a producer, you're like, finish the scene, get the best shot you can, get out the space onto the next one. The space is only important for the scene. The space is only about the scene. And if it's against a wall and the scene is brilliant, that's as good as you're inside a palace. It does not matter. Obviously, you don't want to waste. You're not wasting money. You're not interested in wasting money. But that stuff happens all the time. And actually, your opinion creatively gets mixed up with the DP, the director, the actor, like, you know, in that situation where he wants to try another take, and the director, and then the producers. And actually, you are part of a family of decision-making that sometimes just stepping out, like having an out-of-body experience, and stepping outside your body and going, okay, this is now out of my hands. I will encourage them to not, you know, what I do is I say that, I mean, it doesn't often happen, that kind of thing, but it happens a lot, if that makes sense. Things get cut that you invest in. They just don't make the cut, the scene didn't work or whatever. And that was a set that never gets seen, you know? And you think, oh God, that's money. But that is part of the filmmaking process.
Part of the joy of it, isn't it? I've got some questions, Joel. I know you're keen for these, so we've got a few. I'm going to start with at the start, which is Izzy. She says, what was your first job on a film as a production designer? And what were the biggest lessons you learned from that job? So what was the one that felt significant to you?
Really? So as on a film?
Yeah.
So because I designed a ton of commercials and videos, Fat Boys, you know, like loads and loads of music videos, Prodigy, and you know, so I've been around all of that world for a very long time. So my first kind of like probably meaningful, I did a working title movie, but that was just like, it was kind of weirdly, I was going to try and make Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And by designing the working title film, I would have one film made that basically meant that I wasn't going to be a red flag to Disney.
Yeah.
So I made this working title 2, which is like their micro division. I made this little film with Orlando Bloom, which was like probably the easiest thing I've ever done because it wasn't challenging compared to the music videos I did, which were like sculpting things and weird crap and stuff and VFX. That was just like quite a simple film with Orlando Bloom and Billy Piper, and actually low budget and easy. The first meaningful thing was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and oddly, it was quite similar to Dark Materials because I'm a serial kind of in the team family person in some senses. I don't like the phone call that says, can you come and start tomorrow and you've got 10 weeks and this, but that and the other. You know, on Hitchhikers, I did upwards of a year of development, visual development. And Nick, the producer I was working with, grew a beard. And the deal was he wouldn't get the beard shaved until we got the film greenlit. So, you know, finally, the head of Disney greenlit our movie. But I was in it on a kind of very deep and meaningful level by that point. I'd invested upwards of a year of my time to make that happen for nothing. because I was passionately trying to make that film. So by that point, I was kind of in the DNA of everything on that film. Disney, nobody could do anything because obviously I had 50, 100 million farting around, 17 years ago. And yes, I'd done film, and yes, I'd been in the industry already for a long time and done a lot of things. But that was a big film to design and handhold. And it was the first one that kind of taught me the complex lessons of politics and money. And the supervising art director that I employed on that had done Moonraker. I don't know if everyone's too young probably for that, like a James Bond film that, we grew up with. He was so seasoned. I employed somebody like my right-hand person, the kind of my kind of sidekick, as it were. I employed somebody who was so experienced. They were more experienced than all the Disney execs. So basically, he was my protector. Because these are the things, you can be that boss, but if you don't have people watching your back, you're in deep doo-doo.
Right. And it's a good thing to know, isn't it? If you've got a partner in crime or someone who takes that element of it, the political element of it on a production like that. Because was it Garth Jennings' first movie? Or had he done a movie before?
It was, and then we did Son of Rambo. Right. So I did the other film. So we were going to make Son of Rambo first. And I saw Hitchhikers on the desk in the office when I was there, and I was like, let's do that. And they were like, well, I don't know. And I think Spike Jonze had been given it.
Right.
And had said to Garth, because we knew Spike, and Garth and Spike are good friends, and it was like, why don't you? And again, I don't know if everyone knows Spike Jonze, but basically he's a kind of quite creative guy, a bit like Garth, a bit like, there's a kind of series, a group of these directors that are kind of quite a bit auteur, odd,
Many of them from music video and commercials, weren't they?
Yeah.
A group of people had come through like that.
Yeah, and we all knew each other. It's kind of a family of people. Some are kind of some like Joe Wright, who have gone into more kind of like quite classic filmmaking, or Edgar Wright, right? And yeah, so it's kind of interesting group of people. And yeah, he's I can't remember the question.
Well, biggest lesson you learned, the political bit of it, I guess.
Sorry, well, the biggest lesson was I learned was so huge that it was like it wasn't a singular lesson.
Yeah, right.
It was an experiential. It was an experiential thing that went on for 2.5 years. Yeah. One of the things that people that I've realised is that when I talk to people about like, oh, what's he like? They definitely don't say, oh, he bails halfway through,
right?
Or that's not in the kind of conversation. Like sticking through something, ensuring you stick through it, being honorable. When you say you'll do it, you do it. When you say you'll be there, you'll be there. When you say you can bring it on budget, you bring it on budget. That means a lot. And the world we're in right now, people think it doesn't mean that much. People are very quick to change minds, to jump ship, to want more money, to grow. I've only learned by making some mistakes, but sticking them through to learn from those mistakes, rather than just bailing every time you kind of think it's a mistake. You never know if it's a mistake. The amount of people who told me to leave Black Mirror within 2 years of doing it. And it would never, if I'd left, made it to Netflix. Yeah. So, and then no one would have seen, you know what I mean? Because there was only 3 of us really making that show, Charlie, Annabelle, myself. And loads of people came and went, and lots of people told us not to be so silly, said, get out, Joel, it's a load of crap. I'm like, no, it's not. So having belief rather than just doing it for money or for your credit or whatever. Some people say I'm leaving because I want a better credit. I want more credits. I want to stack up my IMDb. Try making 7 years of a show for 1 credit, which is me on Black Mirror, or 5 years on a show for 1 credit, which is me on Dark Materials.
Right.
That's what, 13, 12 years of my life for 2 credits. If you want credits, you could go a different route.
Yeah, it's hard to contend with that, isn't it, to think about that? But the importance of integrity is clear there. I've got a question from Chris. Good morning. Thanks for taking the time out to speak to us. Costume and set design are 2 of my favourite parts of the film industry and TV. As students without a source of funding, what are some ways that we can keep the cost of production design down to a minimum? Thank you.
Good taste.
Yeah.
Good taste doesn't cost anything. So less is more.
Yeah.
Is my suggestion. You know, every time you want to do more, you are probably taking a risk that it will start to look less.
Right.
And good taste is free if you have it, or if you can find someone with it. And sometimes, even if you're not sure, you know, you think, oh, I'm a fashionista, I've got great taste. You might need to check yourself. You might want to find someone who's just got that kind of edge, and actually money doesn't play a part in that.
Yeah, I was talking to a student yesterday about they're doing a cinematography reel, and they had picked as part of a kind of lookbook a series of beautifully lit shots, which there's nothing in them. They're beautifully lit, and I said that costs you nothing. Just you need to practice, and you need to test, and ask advice from people around you, and find that lighting plan, which will make people kind of look up, because it's that investment in it through time and energy and understanding that can get to that space. And I think that speaks to that taste point. That's really good advice. I'm going to take that up. I can take that one away.
I mean, there's a guy I worked with 25 years ago who's a costume. He was uber, like, it's really funny. Greg Fay, his name was, and he came from East End market trading. Okay, so he's like, oh, Joe, you know, he's like slightly smelt a bit, and he was like kind of hair over there, and he's like, you know, he kind of was this really seemingly dodgy bloke, and he'd be like, Kate Moss, and like we'd do a job, and like Kate Moss would be standing there, he'd like, get a bin bag and wrap it around her and like rip it, and he'd be like, she looks fucking great, you know, like that, and I'd be like, oh my god, and everyone would go, oh, Greg, you're a genius, and you know, it looked great. Like, he would just pick up old crap and like rip it and like cut it a bit with scissors and draw a bit with marker pen and then stick it on a model, or, you know, on an actor, or on a whatever it was, for a music video or something, or for a commercial. And everyone would be like lauding him up. But the truth is, what he did, he had this kind of really unusual, for who he was, the book and the jacket and the book didn't look like the same thing, you know. Yeah. And you know, if you open the book up and what you saw was this exterior that was like market trade, and what you got was like quite interesting bravery, sensitivity, interesting taste. That he saw it for what it was. He was able to make bold decisions, and it worked.
Right.
And it weren't about money.
Yeah, strong ideas. I've got a question. Oh, Chris also says they love the production design on Hitchhiker's Guide. So that's a nice little nod from that questioner. From anonymous attendee, we said about QAnon, didn't we, in this group? What was the most challenging episode of Black Mirror to design for, and why? Side note, pig episode was a shocker. Let's not dwell on the pig, but which one? I mean,
but when you say shocker, do you mean a shocker as in it was crap, or do they mean?
I think it's shocking.
Oh, all right.
So was there a particular episode?
I must admit that was in 2011, and we were looking at different episodes of Black Mirror, and I told my wife about the pig one, and she said, "Don't do it. Don't do whatever this mirror thing is. Yeah. It's not worth it. You'll end your career." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not sure. I think you know, I know, yes, the Prime Minister and the pig. It's complicated, but it sounds like a disaster." And I was like, "Well, let's go for it." So, like, I mean, even before I even began, people were saying, "Don't do it." But that wasn't the hardest one to put on screen. Weirdly, early on, 15 Million Merit, which we created in 2011, yeah. Was, or 2012, but basically was all in camera except for 5 VFX shots. So where you would do it all in blue screen or in a volume stage, but you would never have, like, in a volume stage, you'd have it in the eyes now. But back then, we made all the sets out of LED screens, right? And so the sets were built out of LED screens, and we had a team of graphics, motion graphic artists, continuously working. And then behind all the set walls were loads of people with the computers pressing buttons. So as you walk past, adverts would pop up and things would change, and you could use a vending machine, and the screen would like lift your blinds up. And it was extraordinarily kind of like cutting edge, complex bit of television design. And no one could work out. It got nominated for a BAFTA. No one could work out. And what won the BAFTA was a location decoration job, you know?
Right.
Because no one really knew whether it was VFX or production design. They didn't even know what it was. They were like, I don't even know how you did it.
But that's back to Chris's thing, isn't it? Where you're saying if you think in that parallel kind of thought thing, to do that in VFX would be very challenging, but to make it physical, and we're seeing that in more and more in virtual production with LED sets and those kind of things, that you're acting to something, aren't you? And that was a problem 20 years ago, where you're acting in a green or a blue screen or whatever. But by doing it that way, the performers are in a space, aren't they? They're in a void.
I mean, Daniel Kaluuya's eyes, you know, like you saw in his eyes, and so people went, hang on. No, if it was VFX, you wouldn't afford, you know. So, but that was very early in the kind of in what I'd call the era of, you know, well, basically, if you want to win awards, it's kind of simple in one level. Make something look very setty. Sometimes, or go to big, lavish, beautiful places, because actually the harder you work to make it invisible, the harder the work is to see.
Yeah.
Or the more confusing it is as to what it means. You know, most people think dark materials is a big VFX number. Those are blue screens, green screens. It's not. You know, like we built Cittagazze on the backlot, the whole of an Italian town. Oxford, the rooftops are all built. You know, everything, the retiring room, the Bear Palette, everything's a huge set, a massive set coming up, going down, coming up, going down. And but most people think there's no way we'd do that. So it must be VFX, and it's interesting. It doesn't matter that the audience just falling into it means more to me than people in the industry going, I see what that is, because actually the more you can make it kind of like interwoven to a point where nobody really knows how the hell you did it. They presume that's a location, or they think it could be VFX. Do you know what I mean? The more they don't really know how you do it, the more you've won the argument and you've done your job right.
Yeah, so the less you think about it, the more invested you are in that place, aren't you? I love that about the Oxford sets, and that they feel right, and that's all there is to it. It feels right. It could have been shot there. You know,
the art of that is that it felt like Oxford.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like a fancy show because we were building it. We could do anything.
Yeah.
So when you could do anything, you're like, you know, should I do anything? I guess. And then when you're like, well, no, let's make it just feel real. So I think it's I think the key thing is, you know, again, check yourself if you're doing stuff, because if the difference between a room that's a location or a room that's a set is that you start rethinking what the set could be because you're building a set, not a location, you've maybe got it wrong, if that makes sense. Just because it's set doesn't mean you should do more to it or make it more special. You should just get it right, you know.
Got a great question from Linda. She's talking about this notion of visual conditioning, and back to the war room with the wall. She says, how do the images get on the wall in relation to the script in the first place? Where do they come from? Is it dreams, real life experience, other productions? You said it was like a stream of stuff's coming in your head all the time. You're kind of full of visual.
Yeah. So there's a thing. So number one, like sometimes just referencing kind of things, a huge amount of instinct as to like what something could be, whether it's fresh, original, new. A reliance on some talent around me that's been around me as kind of collaborators for a long time. But most of it's kind of instinctive. What's interesting about the war room wall, and what we sometimes do, is a thing called a color script. And I don't know whether you get involved in color scripts too much there.
You showed some last time you were here, and we do use them, yeah. So students started using them pretty much after that talk, I think, because it's so effective in
understanding the palette that you're doing.
Right.
And that's the other side of it. So once you get it all up, you realize, shit, everything's dark. You start, you know, moving it around a bit, trying to create some kind of enjoyable peak and trough through the journey of the visual journey of a film or a show or you know, a small story or whatever. But there's no exacting science to any of it. And you've got to embrace failure. You literally, that's the only thing, the biggest bit of advice I can give is see failure as your best friend. Because if you don't fail, you don't quite know if you've succeeded.
Right.
So if you don't cock stuff up, you don't know when you've got it right.
But what, with this range of influences, where is it coming from? What's feeding that? Do you ever get dry of ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of so like some people I work with, they come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and they leave at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and I go for a run every day. So I run 4 or 5 miles a day, 7 days a week. I bowl up and rock up sometimes late, sometimes early. Sometimes I go late, sometimes I leave really early. My brain gets completely like, I'm 51. I'm quite old now. My brain gets a little bit kind of exhausted with this energy, expenditure. And on Black Mirror, over again, I would just suddenly leave on a Wednesday or a Thursday and go home and just like literally listen to no one. So then I plugged my brain back in and rebooted it. Quite often, because the noise on one Black Mirror would become so loud that I would just leave everyone alone and clear my head to be the only person thinking with Charlie about the other one that no one's thinking about.
Right.
And obviously people wouldn't want to give me allowances in my workspace to have that time and freedom to do that, because they all need answers. Everyone's panicking and we've got a thing. Once you're in production, it's relentless. So I would just slowly slink off and reprogram my head. And so I just have my own process to clear my brain to be able to just kind of clear it of the clutter of the current problem and, start letting it fill back up, as it were, with the challenges of the new one.
It's interesting where you say about the walls and, taking them down, putting them up and those kind of things. How do you do that in your own head in segregating these ideas? You're able to kind of wipe the slate, are you?
That's the thing. That's part of it. Yeah. Right. That's part of the thing. I mean, at the moment I'm also looking in development, as it were, of ideas of things I would love to be part of, other shows and things that are many years off making that I'm excited to do, things that are kind of sooner that I might be involved in. And obviously all of them need to be compartmentalized in a way that they don't cloud the issue of the day. And as you met Fabia, I have an assistant, so I'm very lucky. And I have a kind of a large kind of group around that support. The interesting thing is, you're not solo. Nothing happens on your own. I might as well stay in the Garrett studio and made art. This is a massive collaboration. I have a huge family of creatives and kind of producerial types all around me to support and enable the bonkers and the kind of the ideas. And that's a huge part of it. And they all need to be as important. I treat some of them like my bosses, even though they work for me.
Yeah. Because
they tell me, don't be so silly. You can't do that. We ain't doing that. You know what I mean? So I don't walk around going, we need this. I've got to do that. No, if the people I respect and love and trust tell me to back down, I back down. That's a big part of it.
I think, again, it's so important to learn at college or university that, if you trust your creative team, they've got the project's interests at heart and your interests at heart. And they probably, in some ways, know you better than yourself. And that they're a check for you, aren't they, to find a way through a problem or a challenge or whatever. I've got a question from Ben. He says, good to see you back. He must have caught you in the first year, a couple of years ago.
Hi, Ben.
You spoke about credits briefly. As a question for those who will be new to the industry, so Ben will graduate in June next year. Do you think it's best to pick up, if we're talking about credits, small credits or bigger credits? What's the, if you were back when you do,
what is it Ben does?
Director.
I think as a director, the only
producer. He's just corrected me. Producer.
Right. Actually, experience is key, isn't it, as a producer? So because some producers can be producing multiple projects, some are early, some are later in their processing, and actually, there's this kind of aspect to that, which is if you're very lucky as a producer and you understand the developing processes of a show, and also somebody who's making a short film or something says, can you come in, I need your help, I need you to get, and then somebody else is in post-production and they need someone with a producerial skill to get, so you can build up credits just by being good and being busy and being very supportive. Because actually, if you've got skill in that role, you can dig a lot of people out of a lot of holes. So it's not as simple as like a DOP. You know, they shouldn't be doing 3 shop jobs at the same time. That ain't cool. Something's going to go wrong, I'd say. Whereas a producer theoretically could be in development, in production, and in post-production. If they've got the bandwidth. So yeah, there's no. I think that's on you. Experience as a producer is key to you know go through the hell, and it will be golden.
The challenge with the smaller projects and the bigger projects, it depends what's around, doesn't it? And I think it's kind of, if you think you can do something, as you say, you kind of express an interest in that and kind of help that project deliver. You're meeting more people, aren't you? Widening your circle.
Yeah, and it's really weird. Producerially, there's a lack of. I mean, the one thing about producing is modern producing. When I say that, I mean people who are modern producing, which is understanding all the kind of modern filmmaking techniques and engaging in them on a meaningful level. And if when you're producing, you are implementing and creating in the DNA of a show or an idea something that's original and new to filmmaking. You know, you'll put yourself under a lot of pressure, but you might get out of it an experience which makes you more valuable. You know, we're in a new world of filmmaking, so you know I'd engage in that. I mean, it makes everyone's producers, makes their life much harder. Getting complex talent, telling a complex story, doing things that you can't afford, you know, all of that makes your life much harder. But I would 100% engage in it, because if one bit of 100 pays off, then that's it, you know, set, you know, you've got a bit more experience than somebody else, you know.
It amazes me that with your career, that painting practice as an operation kind of is doing all these other things, you know, that you're across many things, although you're, you know, Dark Materials, you're doing all this work, that the company continues, and the other things that you're doing around, or you're, you know, like you said about other projects that are coming up, that you're able to manage that. With the move to exec producing for Dark Materials and that showrunner role that we hear a lot about, that's broadly what you're doing, isn't it? How is that different to earlier work that you'd been involved in?
Well, I think on Black Mirror, I was kind of doing a similar job. I just didn't get a credit that gave me that, because you know, there's no other designer who phones agents up and employs designers. You know, that's not normal.
Yeah.
I was flying 2 days, you know, a day a week to Canada, over to Iceland,
yeah,
you know, over to South Africa. My eyelids started dropping off, and I would do, you know, production meetings, and you know, this country, that director, and this director. So I've kind of been conditioned, and as a company owner, I also understand the challenges of the more global problems of production to a point. And you know, exec producing is interesting. There's a whole type of there's in person and present, you know, type thing, which is, I guess, part of what I am, who I am. And then there's, you know, loads of exec producers on shows that are to do with financing and growth and the completion of a show, or kind of, or the original idea, the originating of a show, or they're in creative roles like writer or director because they are high enough in this, you know, standing in the industry to be deserving of that. And then there are the ones that are responsible on a day-to-day meaningful level to never give up, you know. And so that role is a really tough role, and quite isolating, weirdly, and quite lonely sometimes, for those people and for me, you know, as I've witnessed a bit. You know, it's you're as a designer, you're in a huge team. There's a lot of camaraderie, and as a producer, you're literally like like that. And you're like a magnet for people who have problems, you know, because your job is to get the job done.
Yeah.
So obviously I'm working around the key execs on this show, so I'm not, having all of that because I've got this job to do. But I've done it a bit now on a few jobs. And like I say, the best way to describe it is the complex issues you have when the kind of things you're interested in as a designer have to go out the window. Because everything's important, not just that thing you're interested in. My interest in VFX and design and all things visual is part of what I have to take a kind of accountability for. Suddenly, there are actors who have problems, or there are schedules that are problematic, or so yeah, it's like mind-blowing sometimes, but it's quite fun as well. So,
and it's good to understand those other areas, isn't it? It's important for producers to understand that, as you say, that the role you undertake is unusual, both on Black Mirror and Dark Materials, but you're able to carve that because of your interests or skills or things that you want to do, that things that,
I think what you teach there, because you guys teach this in the round filmmaking process to everyone.
Yeah.
So, if you've not come from an area of script or directing, or if you've not been like where you are, you kind of, everyone gets to learn a bit with each other about those processes before they enter the industry.
Yeah.
Which I think is really, really valuable, because they should go into the industry with a sense of all those roles. I mean, it's mind-blowing when you enter in on a meaningful level. If you go into a big show, if you went to a big Netflix show or The Witcher or something like Dark Materials or whatever, it's like, they're big machines. They're like Marvel films or Star Wars. They're all of a style, of a make, which are huge machines that are kind of like really complicated and barreling down the road. But what you're teaching, I think, from your end, and I didn't have that, so I didn't really. It took me a long time to figure out the inner workings of some of those other areas, whereas you guys get to discuss it internally. Like, your students get to understand each other's jobs to a point, don't they?
And I think mixing outside of discipline is so important for the world. That if you do that here, it's easier to do it out in the world. I got a question from Christiana, who was there. She says, my 18-year-old self was very inspired by your masterclass from a couple of years ago. So thank you for that. And this is a nice one to finish on, I think, because we need to wrap up in a couple of minutes' time. But I was wondering what you think is the best bit of advice for graduates on their first few jobs and being on set. What do you want to see? What's a little, from all your experience and all those people who've been through your sets?
Wear black.
It's that simple. Why is that?
Well, because lots of people rock up in some bright t-shirt going, I'm here, and everyone wants them to get fuck off set because they're taking the actors' eye lines away from the camera. Sorry, that's kind of, that's real. If people wonder why everyone looks so dark and black in their black clothes, and is because it's very distracting for an actor to have someone rock up in a bright color. So even if you've got a lot of flair, be careful.
That is a brilliant tip.
It's the only thing I'll say. I only came on this video chat just to tell you that.
Thank you.
Because I'm sick and tired of everyone wearing bright colors. No.
I've muted today, knowing that this is a thing that Joel Collins is famous for shouting at people on set.
What are you doing? No, exactly. No, no, but that's a tip. That's just a hint. But interestingly, on set, I would say I had somebody come here for some experience who's doing English at Oxford. We mostly have work experience from all over, but a lot of Welsh colleges to support the local kind of level of into the business, and she was like, she thought working in production meant being on set, and she didn't realize that working in production meant being in an office,
right,
booking cabs, and maybe like printing out call sheets and never going anywhere near set, like ever. Like, that's it. Like, being in production doesn't mean you'll ever go on the studio floor. So what I would say is, slightly, as you're entering in the industry, realign your terminology. And I guess, maybe that's something you try and explain to everyone, but because of this vastness, like I said, of the kind of ecosystem of film, sometimes people misunderstand when they kind of say, I'd love a job in X, and they don't realize job in X means something different to what you think. So as you're entering in, if you want to be on the floor, no, the studio floor, which I think is one of the more complex places to get to, that's a kind of pathway that is more complex than people understand. Does that make sense? It's kind of,
yeah, absolutely. I think understanding pathways through, if you aspire to be in art department, understanding what the pathways through that while you're at uni and asking those questions of people like you or you know, staff at college or uni is really important. If you're not sure or you can't find out.
I mean, that's the one thing I'd say to you, you know, to you is just get some interest. If this was, because I know this is global, but if this was just, you know, just art, I would say this is the pathway in. But obviously I can't do that because this is more about, there's a whole load of filmmakers here. Everything is kind of like the best approach to get in. But so beyond understanding terminology, understanding the pathway, wearing black clothes. But that goes in hand with what I'm going to say, which is know how to be invisible. Because no matter how special you are, taking your ego, taking all your pride away, and removing the feeling of how special you are for a while you're just watching and learning is probably the best advice and the best thing you could do. Because barreling in and going, I'm special, I'm bright, you know, it's one thing just to like really listen, really observe, not be shy or quiet, because people might need you to kind of be on it, like, yes, what would you need and all that stuff, you know, so you're very personal and human. But basically just know, even if you know you're really special and you know you've got an amazing talent, let that be seen by people rather than tell people you have it. So hold it back, hold it in, give everything you need to give, all the right points if you can. And part of wearing black is like being understated. Do you know what I mean? Not making a big splash on your arrival into the industry, but being very kind of navigating your way in, where you shine for all the right reasons, rather than kind of are allowed for the wrong, you know.
That's really wonderful. Thanks, Joel. I know you're super busy. You've got how many eps to shoot?
What to on this show? 8.
Yeah,
we're you know, on the out.
Right. We really appreciate it. Thanks for making the time, and thank Fabia as well for helping us set it up, and thank you to Jane and Megan for sorting out my Zoom bodges before we came on the call. I appreciate that. But thanks so much, Joel. You're a superstar, and hopefully we'll come and see you in the spring, COVID allowing.
And yeah, thanks, guys.
Take care.
Take care.